reach heaven's joys, O bright and sun. Heart of my heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler.
Hello, welcome again to our study in the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings. Last time, you'll remember that we studied about the beginning, as it were, of Jacob's family. What a beginning it was. He worked 7 years to have the hand of Rachel, but he ended up with Leah. What a shock to the system. Another week with her, and then he had Rachel also as a wife, had 2 handmaids, one for each of them. Another 7 years of labor. During that time frame, apparently, 11 boys and 1 girl were born. There was quite a wrestling match going on between Leah, the older of the 2 girls, and Rachel. A wrestling match for the affections and the attention, the honor, as it were, of Jacob. But the time was fulfilled. Jacob went to Laban. He asked to be allowed to go, to go back home, so to speak. Laban didn't want him to go. Instead, he wanted him to name his wages. Name what I'll give you is the way he put it. And of course, Jacob didn't want him to think he was giving him anything. He said, "You're not going to give me anything." He said, "Instead, these will be my wages. I will earn them. I will work for them," is the way that you and I would say it. And so the agreement was struck with Jacob saying, I want the speckled, spotted, and brown sheep and the speckled and spotted goats. And that was agreeable to Laban. They divided the flocks, and as they divided them, then Jacob was removed some 3 miles or so distant, 3 days' journey distance. They've separated so that the 2 will not intermingle. There'll be no battles over that type of a thing. Jacob then sets out to bring forth more produce for himself as well as for Laban. And so you remember, he set these specially carved out sticks in the area where the animals would be drinking water, and that's when they would mate. And he may have thought that he had a special remedy for that. I don't think he needed one. God takes care of Jacob. He always has, and he will continue to do so. So let's go forward now here in Genesis chapter 30, and let's see what else took place. We'll back up just a little and reread. Verse 37, "Now Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar, and of the almond and the chestnut trees, peeled white strips in them, and exposed the white which was in the rods. And the rods which he had peeled he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted." Well, that's exactly what Jacob wants, because that would be his wages, as you will well remember. "Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the streaked, and all the brown in the flock of Laban. And he put his own flocks by themselves, and did not put them with Laban's flock. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. And when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the strongers Jacob's. Thus the man became exceedingly prosperous, and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys." Well, he's exercising wisdom, as it were, in husbandry, but beyond that, beyond the labor that he's involved in, God is at work. And that's noted within the text, that God blesses him, that God makes him a rich man. Go all the way back to the story of Abraham and remember that when the king of Sodom came out to greet him, when he came back from the battle with the 4 kings, that Abraham noted, God is the one that made me rich. I'm not going to have you taking claim for it. God is the one that blesses me. Well, Jacob has the same situation going here. God is blessing him as well. He's becoming rich, but God's making him that way. Well, as you can imagine, trouble is going to come out of all this. Jacob is growing more and more rich, and you can just about imagine what Laban, and more particularly his sons, are going to have to say about that. And that's the way chapter 31 of Genesis opens. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has acquired all this wealth. In other words, he's a thief. That's the way you and I would put it. He's stealing. He's stealing from Dad, and he's stealing our inheritance. And boy, those kind of battles can certainly go on within an immediate family, much less an extended family, involving the in-laws and the outlaws, so to speak, as we sometimes say. And that's exactly what's taking place, and Jacob's concerned about it. So verse 2, and Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable toward him as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and your family, and I will be with you. Somebody else has been told by God to go to a land that I will show you. That was Abraham. And now here is Jacob, and God's saying, go back home. Go back home. Go back to the land that I showed Abraham a long time ago. It's time to leave here. God agrees with apparently the thinking that Jacob already was in the midst of. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock. And he said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me. Now observe, there are 3 things, it appears, that are going to cause Jacob to go ahead and go. First of all, the changed relationship with Laban and his sons. Secondly, the message of God. And now thirdly, he's looking for the approval of his wives. God has blessed him. He's told them that. And isn't it interesting that now he says that, but isn't it also interesting he still calls him the God of my father? He's not yet calling him my God. And that's fascinating and a little bit sad, don't you think? Because this was Jacob's God, and Jacob's God was taking care of him. Verse 6, and you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to hurt me. Here he comes again. The second time, emphasizing God is the one that took care of me. And he continues, if, he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me 3 times now. In this short conversation with his wives, Jacob has indicated God is the source of my blessings, of our blessings, if you would. And he goes on to say, and it happened at that time, when the flocks conceived, let me back up just a minute. Notice God blessed him, and it happened what? They conceived, lifted up his eyes, and what did he see? In a dream, behold, the rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. Then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream. Now, by the way, this is a vision that he is having here. The second vision, as you'll recall, that he has had. And what does the angel of God say to him? Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes now and see. All the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel. Now remember, Bethel means house of God. You'll recall that when Jacob was leaving his homeland, leaving his mom and dad, that he stopped and spent the night at Bethel, and there it was that there was that stairway leading up to heaven, and angels were ascending and descending, and he named that place House of God, or Bethel. So I'm the God of Bethel, speaking to you now, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. So he's telling his wives, God has told me it's time to go. It is interesting that God in that dream, in that vision, recalls the vow that Jacob made. And you remember what it was. He said, if you take care of me, then I'll give you a tenth of all that I have. And don't forget that, because God has certainly not forgotten it. And so then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us and also completely consumed our money. Now go back. When we talked about the bride price a couple of lessons ago, we noted that that price was to be held by the family for the 3 Ds: divorce, desertion, or death. In other words, the money was to be kept to take care of this daughter if she had to come back home. It was not really, in some senses, the family's money. Instead, it was money that belonged to the bride, to the daughter. They say, we see what's going on. You've worked hard, and our daddy has not treated you well. And furthermore, all the money that you gave for Leah and for me, for Rachel, well, all that money's gone. It's been consumed. 14 years of wages now gone. 14 years, 10 shekels approximately a year. That's 140 shekels. It's 14 years worth of common laborers' wages. That'd be $280,000 in modern terms. He's wasted all that money. And the girls notice it, and so guess what? They're ready to go. And so now he has 3 things on his side. First, he has seen the changed attitude. Second, he's been told by God what he needs to do. And now third, his wives are joining him. They're ready to go with him. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. It's interesting to me, and it should be noted by all of us men, that the attitude of the man of the household toward God is the very attitude that generally will be exhibited by his family. He's given credit to God for blessing him, and now his 2 wives also give credit to God for that blessing, and they, like Jacob, are ready to yield to the will of God. So verse 17, then Jacob rose and set his sons and his wives on camels, and he carried away all his livestock and all of his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. And Jacob stole away unknown to Laban the Syrian, in that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. So he fled with all that he had, and he arose and crossed the river and headed toward the mountains of Gilead. Now, she took the household idols. And what are these household idols that we're talking about here? Well, Holdcroft, in his book on the Pentateuch, comments on that. He said the teraphim, that's the name used for the household idols, would have represented the family's unique spiritual identity. They gave focus to the family's emotional attachments. To possess them would legitimatize the family of Jacob and provide Rachel and her sister with personal status as family matriarchs. And that may be the reason that she took the gods. We really don't know. We just have the record. She took them, and she took them without the knowledge of Jacob. And boy, that's going to be significant as the story unfolds, and as you very well know. Well, now they've stolen away. Laban is off shearing sheep, so he's 3 days' journey away. Here goes Jacob and his family, and they set out, and listen to what we find. And Laban was told on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled. So now they've been gone 3 days. They were already 3 days removed, so now they're about 6 days removed. And what report do we have? Then he took his brethren with him and pursued them for 7 days' journey. And he overtook them in the mountains of Gilead. So he pursues them for 7 days' journey. That's a good distance. And that's about probably how far Jacob had gotten with his family by that time. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad." So God is still watching out for Jacob. He's protecting him. After all, he's the one that told Jacob it's time to go home. Jacob's following his instructions, and so God is blessing him just as he promised that he would do. So Laban overtook Jacob. Now, Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done, that you have stolen away unknown to me, and carried away my daughters like captives taken with a sword? Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you've done foolishly in so doing. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad.'" Now I'm going to tell you, Laban is just bragging here, and it's a bunch of hot air, really. He says, "It's in my power to do you harm." No, it's not. Because the God of Jacob's already told him, don't you even think about it. Don't speak to him either good or bad. He knows that God's going to protect him. It's not within Laban's power. But Laban is, through bluster, is showing how upset he is. And that's what's going on here at this particular time. Well, then we find in verse 30, "And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" Laban expresses that he understands why Jacob would want to leave. It's time to go home, time to go see Dad. It's been by now 20 years that he's been gone. But he wants to know, what you steal my gods for? And here it comes, because Jacob doesn't know the gods have been stolen. Jacob didn't take them. And he's not going to own up to it, because in his mind he's not guilty, and neither is anyone that is with him. Oh, if he'd have known that his favorite wife was the one that took them, I wonder what his answer would have been. But he didn't know. And so listen to his response. "Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, 'Because I was afraid, I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force.'" Jacob said, "I was afraid of what you were going to do. I left without telling you because I didn't want you taking your daughters and their children away, your grandchildren, because they're my wives. They're my children. I feared you. I stole away for that reason. I snuck away, we might say." But listen to what else he says. "With whomever you find your gods, do not let them live. In the presence of my brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you." For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Now remember, Jacob had been very careful to name his wages so that his wages would be distinct. The sheep, the goats would have clearly been his. If he's saying to Laban, "If you find a white sheep or a white goat among my things, take them and kill the one who stole them. And the same holds for your gods. Of course, he didn't know what had happened to those gods, or he might not have said that, but that is what he said. And so listen now to the response that came. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, verse 33, into Leah's tent, and into the two maids' tents, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is with me. And he searched, but did not find the household idols. Well, I don't know whether Rachel told the truth or not there. But whatever the case may be, Laban was not going to search the saddle under the conditions that she had just named. And so he didn't find the gods, his household idols. And for good reason, because he didn't look in the one place where they were to be found. But now listen, because Jacob now has his opportunity, and it won't be bluster when he responds to the bluster that Laban has put forth before his brethren on that occasion. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us. He's saying, show what has been stolen. Lay it out here. And boy, that's quite a challenge. He knows the answer. Laban hasn't found anything that has been stolen. These 20 years I've been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beasts, I did not bring it to you. I bore the loss of it. You required from my hand what was stolen by day or stolen by night. Now, there are things going on here that you and I don't know, but I suppose because we don't live in that type of agrarian society. But here's the way it worked. Ordinarily, if an animal killed one of the flocks or herds, the shepherd was not responsible. That didn't come out of his wages. But Jacob's saying, when that happened, I took the loss. I didn't cause you to suffer loss. Furthermore, he says, you held me accountable for whatever was stolen by day. Well, that was appropriate. That was the way it normally worked in that society. But he also said, you held me accountable for what was stolen by night. Now, that's not appropriate. That's not normal in that society. It was assumed that there was nothing you could do by night, especially if wild animals were doing the stealing. And yet this is exactly what Jacob says was taking place in his service to Laban. There I was, in the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I've been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock. And you've changed my wages 10 times. Now, by the way, I don't know if that's exact or not. When I was growing up, my mother occasionally would say to me, Gary, if I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. Well, I never had the gumption to say, 1,000 times, Mom? It probably was hyperbole in most cases. I doubt she'd really told me 1,000 times. This may be hyperbole. We really don't know. But what we do know is that the wages were changed. We've already heard that in the text. It's acknowledged that that took place. And notice Laban doesn't contradict that at this time. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. Well, notice again, who does he call God? He says, the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac. Not once has Jacob yet said, my God. It's still the God of my fathers, as he lists them here. But he acknowledges God's taken care of me. God's protected me. You would have left me destitute, Laban, but God is seeing to it that that does not take place. And Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children. This flock is my flock. All that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children whom they have borne? Now therefore come, and let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Then Jacob said to his brethren, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. Laban called it Jagar Shadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. And that basically means a stone of witness, or a pile, a heap of witness. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore its name should be called Gilead, also Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from one another. If you afflict my daughters, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. And Laban said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar, which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond the heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judged between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain, called his brethren to eat bread, and they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning Laban rose and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. Jacob is headed home.
May I reach heaven's joys, O bright and sun, heart of my heart, whatever befall, still be my vision.